Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. As some theatre performances are starting to open in the UK under very strictly controlled conditions after more than 5 months of lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic, the people in charge of our theatres, who have always worked within financial margins that would make most captains of industry wince, have had to make some very difficult decisions in order to survive, which in some cases have involved making staff redundant and cancelling performances that could never make back their cost of production. The reasons why theatre is different from most other industries in relation to the current crisis are detailed in several feature articles by BTG's London editor Philip Fisher, but the major points are, firstly, that so-called social distancing, which is really a misnomer for physical distancing, means that every other row and every other seat on the rows that are occupied must remain empty, reducing the maximum capacity and therefore maximum ticket sales by around 75% without reducing the cost of production. Secondly, theatres are not able to simply open productions at a moment's notice without time to prepare, especially as under lockdown rules, actors are not even allowed to rehearse together. I spoke to senior management of 2 theatres in my own region, Greater Manchester, both of which have now announced opening dates, to get their perspectives on the current situation. Later you can hear me speaking to Jon Gilchrist at Manchester's relatively new Home Arts Centre, but first of all I spoke to Roddy Gauld, Chief Executive of the Octagon Theatre in Bolton, just after the announcement that, after extensive refurbishment, the theatre will finally reopen in December. Last time we spoke properly, it was just before Christmas, at the Christmas show at the football ground. I don't know if you remember, when you were telling me that the building was on schedule, most of the funding was in place. And then 3 months later, we were in lockdown, and I was thinking at the time, I thought, well, the Octagon is quite lucky, really, because they closed anyway, and by the time they come to open, all this will be over, and everything will be okay. But just how wrong was I with all that?
Well, clearly, I should never open my mouth ever again after what I said to you in December. What have I brought upon us? No theatre's had an easy time this year. The whole industry has been decimated. At first, me and my colleagues at the Octagon did think, we might be able to ride this in a different way because, as you said, we were closed anyway. Yeah. And most theatres and my colleagues experienced an awful moment where they were literally returning, near enough overnight, all of their box office income, yet they still had all the costs of the show that was on our way to going to meet. Yeah. And that placed a lot of theatres in really immediate jeopardy. We weren't in that position because we were closed, but the longer it goes on, the more and more it starts to bite. For us, what was our biggest concern was we were still fundraising for the completion of the building. And so we still had nearly £400,000 to raise. And as you can imagine, every potential sponsor, every trust and foundation, understandably had to say no overnight. So that left us with that one panic on one hand. And then our construction project was delayed because the contractors had to slow down for social distancing. They went down to less than a third of the workforce they should have had. There were some parts that couldn't be delivered because of travel restrictions. We had some of the engineering for the seating system was due to come through a mixture of Slovakia and Italy. Of course, they couldn't transport any goods out. And so we started seeing time slip on. And what that meant was it became really obvious that our opening season couldn't go ahead as planned. And so even if restrictions had been lifted and every other theatre could have got back to business, we would have lost several months because we were still in construction when we should have been open. So the effect for us was similar, just hit at a different time. So we had to cancel our autumn shows. We lost £500,000 of expected revenue. And with social distancing, the risk of lockdowns, all these things, like every other theatre, we've had to postpone, cancel our plans due to early 2021. And so in total, just in terms of customer spend at the box office and the bar and so on, we stand to lose over 1.3 million in this current financial year. Now, our best ever turnover has been about 3 million. We were planning a reduced turnover year this year. So that's basically taken about half our income for this year, leaving us with the grants that we get from the Arts Council, Bolton Council and others. The job retention scheme from the government's been a real lifeline, actually, in terms of saving jobs and supporting organisations. And we launched an appeal called the Future Fund, which we estimate the final donations and gift aid will top £70,000. And that's been a real boost for us, actually. but it's undeniably hard. It's really hard. As I say, we typically depend upon 75% of our income in a normal year coming from customer spending.
Yeah.
This was always going to be an abnormal year, but in some ways that just makes it harder because the costs, the risks of setting up a new organisation to some extent, in a new building, no new ways of working, and the one of the ways we hoped to pay off of the kind of cost of being closed so much for the last years was by having a bumpy year this year and a bumpy year next year. And that just looks less and less likely as things stand today. Yeah.
And you've got a new artistic director. She's been there for 18 months now, but she's never had a theatre to actually perform in. All you've been doing other things, haven't you?
I think Lottie takes everything really well in her stride with great grace and resilience. But I feel sorry for her because, you come into a job as an artistic director, you're told you're not going to get to programme a theatre for a year. You kind of get it already. And what a programme. I mean, the world premiere of The Book Thief, opening with One Man, Two Governors, the original premiere of An Adventure. We were all really proud and excited about what we were going to put on, and then it's kind of snatched away from you at the last minute. But, the whole team, Lottie included, I have to say, have been remarkably resilient. I couldn't ask for my colleagues to be more positive, more pragmatic, more creative. And it'll probably be later in the autumn, but I think we can put together a really exciting programme that's much more viable in age of social distancing and still live up to our promise to be, bold, adventurous and popular. So, take my hat off to Lottie and our team. We've learned through doing a capital project and delays and restoration, but of course, actually, the building really should have been open months earlier than it was, than this year. Yeah. We've kind of learned how to cope with delays and setbacks and to adjust our plans. And I think it's that kind of mentality that's going to see us through. We're in the position that we've coped 3 times now with delays. As someone said, we've learned to be nimble. We've learned to do things pretty quickly. We're used to operating in smaller capacities and different venues. So we're just recalibrating again to something totally new. Yeah.
And you said the support scheme from the government was useful, but the employees of the theatre, they must have been looking around them at what's happening at other theatres with redundancies and even theatres closing down for good. And it's a lot of pressure to be working under that, isn't it?
It is. I think for them, for me and for the other managers, absolutely. We've done our best to support our workforce. We're not planning any redundancies at the moment. We're doing everything like every theatre is to avoid them. But it's terrifying, actually, when you look around and you see the scale of losses of jobs. I mean, 2,000 a month, I think somebody calculated that it was averaging out at. That's just terrifying for any industry, actually. Yeah. Mm. And of course, on top of that, all the freelancers we work with have had no employment or very little employment and no support. So from the beginning, my priority and the Octagon's priority has been to try and support the people that we work with. So we've taken as much advantage of the job retention scheme as we can, and I believe it should be a job retention scheme as far as finances permit. We furloughed our casual staff. We furloughed people whose contracts were due to come to an end. We honoured all our existing commitments to freelancers. We joined the Theatre Freelance Task Force, and we're trying to put some commissions out there wherever we can. So, the Octagon, as much as we talk about the building, the capital project is just bricks and mortar. Yeah. What actually really matters is the people that come in there, the people that make it happen, the people that make the shows happen and the projects happen. We're nothing without them. So my absolute priority has been that we do our best to support our staff, our employees, our partners, our freelancers. That's both in terms of providing as much job security as we can, but also information. Because I think you look around and you see all these horror stories and you rightly fear what might be happening next. Is it going to be me? And so, a lot of my time and other the remaining staff's time has gone wherever possible on just keeping people up to date. Regular team meetings, weekly team meetings, video messages to the staff, kind of Q&A sessions. I've got another one this afternoon with a team of staff, so that we can just try and keep people. Trying to address those fears head on, and we've always been very honest about the financial challenges that we face, the loss of the amount of money we're losing, which is probably equivalent to our annual wage bill, actually, about 1.3 million, pretty much equivalent to our payroll for a year. And what we're doing about it, and just always promising to tell people that we'll let them know as soon as we know.
Yeah. Which is more than the government's been doing, because that's one of the major problems, into the lack of information, the lack of any certainty.
It's been deeply frustrating. As grateful as I am, and I truly am, for the kind of the 1.57 billion that the government's announced, it is a slow process to get the money out the door. We have no idea whether we'll get any of it. We won't find out till October time. And the word crown jewels, well, I believe we're Bolton's crown jewel. So, we're being unashamed in making a pitch for it and in lobbying for it. But, I worry about some of the rhetoric about crown jewels and national treasures. I have been frustrated, deeply frustrated and angry at some of the delays in getting government guidance out there about social distancing. Sometimes some things have been leaked in advance. Sometimes they've been complete surprises. There was one day I was, in the car and just listened to the radio and thought, what? Where's this come from Boris? Theatre's open on Saturday. Well, how? Just a real lack of dialogue, of understanding, of communication, just sudden policy announcements that bear no relation to reality. It's been, the way I describe it to the staff is that we spent several months, probably almost in limbo, trying to build a jigsaw that we didn't have a picture of what it looked like, and we didn't have the edge pieces. Yeah. So you basically just got all these different pieces of a jigsaw to try and figure out what it's going to be at the end. And every day you'd get, you'd read something in the news which would make you doubt yourself, or you'd see a press release from someone else. Oh, do they know something we don't? Or you'd read the latest guidance or whatever. And there were times where, honestly, we started plan after plan, week after week, and had no idea how it was going to pan out. So after a while, I got to a point where we just said, look, we're not going to make any decisions. We're actually just going to hold off for a period of time, because any decision we make will be wrong a week afterwards. We're going to give ourselves a deadline where we're going to absorb as much information as possible, and we'll put a few contingency plans together, and when it reaches that date, we'll press the most likely one. But until then, we commit to nothing. Yeah. Which sounds ridiculous, an awful way to run a business. But when facts are changing, so rapidly, it just seemed the only sensible way to actually come through it was to take time to gather, take stock, put off essentially anything that you don't need to do urgently that's financially saving. Obviously, we stopped all expenditure and so on, and just try and let the facts come in and then figure out what your best guess is. And really, any theatre, I think, course of action right now is a series of best guesses, because there's no manual. There's no textbook that says, well, if there was, it's probably written around 1918 and they haven't left it behind for us. Yeah.
How would social distancing look in the Octagon, practically and financially? Would that work in a theatre the size of the Octagon?
I think it's probably harder in the West End than it is in the Octagon, actually. You look at those buildings, that would be tough for them. That would be very, very tough. And what I hope doesn't happen is that government policy gets dictated around a theatre in the West End rather than the theatre sector. We were joking last week that we're very fortunate to have done the redevelopment of the Octagon, because actually it makes social distancing a lot easier. We have more toilets, we've got more space, so it's certainly much easier to do than in the past. I think physically it will mean probably 2 metre gaps, or at least 1.5 metre gaps we expect in the auditorium. The public expect that. We've done surveys, we know what audiences are looking for. That feels weird. I went to the Dukes in Lancaster. I'm on the board there. There was cinema as well as the theatre. And watching a film in the theatre with 2 metre gaps was a strange experience. It didn't quite feel right, but I'm glad it happened. And, it was as full a house as could be, actually. So people were clearly keen to go out and experience it. But it will feel strange, and it will feel strange for the performance. But actually, I also think there's things we can do that others can't. So if I think of the Octagon as a fantastic resource, as well as a theatre, and we look around Bolton Town Centre, our kitchen and bar has much more space for distancing than other restaurants might have. We've got great big studios now, which other charities might be able to use. And if they could do socially distanced over 70 Zumba, then I'm quite up for them doing it, because, that's a good thing to have happening. And why should if we can't be rehearsing in there, why should that room be sitting empty? So I see it actually as an opportunity to do things we might never have thought of doing. We're going to program in a different way. We're going to have probably some smaller pieces around the building in studios, as well as in the main theatre itself. We might do test events in different spaces of the building where we actually, if we're not driving towards that maximum capacity that's normally such a financial imperative, it kind of opens up a bit of license, I think, in a way. If you can't make the numbers work anyway, you may as well do something different.
Yeah.
So I think there's that aspect to it. Obviously, customer safety is important. I'm very aware that if I go into a shop and I don't feel safe, I don't go back. And I think that's true for theatre audiences. So how we get, guidance on masks and hand sanitizer, just explaining to people the process, I think, is going to be key. I often joke that we need an airline-style announcement. Welcome to your new Octagon Theatre. Here are your safety features. Yeah. Just to get people into the habit of what it is. But those safety videos are for reassurance as much as anything else, and reassuring people that when they come out to the theatre, they feel safe is going to be really, really important. So I think there'll be lots of messaging, lots of space. Perhaps different uses around the building. I'm not sure there'll be a one-way system, and we're going to look into that. But we're listening to all the feedback from audiences and following all the guidelines to kind of make it safe, and backstage as well. And it's been really interesting. A lot of audiences and respondents have commented about safety for the performers. And because we've got more dressing rooms now, that's certainly a lot more achievable for us than the pokey cramped backstage we had before. In financial terms, it's not easy now. The Octagon typically relies upon selling at least 75% of our seats across a year to be financially viable. Social distancing will mean that we might get 25% capacity. Depending on our stage shape, it literally ranges from 24 to 26%. There's not much in it.
Yeah.
So you can see the gap there that's going to cause. We've had to weigh up, should we, and this is part of our process for bidding for some of that government support, should we mothball and just wait, or should we push ahead? No brainer as far as I'm concerned. We push ahead and open. I think to have a brand new theatre and not open as soon as safely possible would be the wrong thing to do. Wrong for our audiences, wrong for our town, wrong for employing people. Our imperative has been to just open as soon as safely, practically possible.
And you do have an opening date now of December, you've just announced, but you're not fully reopening. To what extent are you going to be opening?
Well, we'll certainly open the kitchen bar. We're looking at some social distance events that can happen over December, probably family events, maybe some storytelling, creative activities. Our creative engagement work will resume back in the building. That's been online since lockdown began. And we're looking at what options we've got for shows that are viable with social distancing. Big uncertainty for us really is how COVID-19 behaves over the next few months, what the government guidance is. I know that some people are afraid about this flu season, will there be a second spike and so on. So we're probably not going to make a decision until slightly near the time. We've got some ideas on our sleeve, but whether they really work kind of is circumstantial. We might decide in November or beginning of November, really. Certainly from January onwards, we hope to have productions in the main auditorium, and we'll certainly be announcing them in the autumn. Lottie's got a few different titles under consideration. We're exploring rights and talking to some performers and creators at the moment. So I think there'll be certainly shows happening in the current financial year. But the other thing we're going to do is we're really aware that for a lot of people in our industry, there hasn't been any work for a while. And so we're going to start putting together a programme that will include independent performers, freelance artists. That might mean music, it might mean comedy, it might mean spoken word or one-person shows. It could be a whole range of different stuff. So, we've got this fantastic new building to open. We're really looking at what the opportunities for people other than us are to kind of put on a show or a gig, get in front of an audience and make most of it. So, like I said, it's going to be a little while before we feel we can announce something. That's partly because we're just testing our way through this. And also, no one's opened a theatre in a pandemic before, as our head of production pointed out. So there's always that danger we'll slip in a week here or something will take longer there. And we don't want to do is put yet another programme on sale that has to be cancelled. So we're just keeping our powder a little dry for a while, seeing how things go and announcing things probably on a show-by-show or month-by-month basis for a period of time until there's something like a new norm established.
Well, it's good to see you being keeping positive about it, keeping active. But other than giving money, what is the best thing the government could do at this moment for theatres, do you think?
I think as much clarity as the government can give as possible. UK Theatre have done a brilliant job lobbying for the sector. And they kept saying one thing, just give us a no later than date.
Yeah,
it's things like that. Even if you can't tell us what the answer is, just tell us when you're going to give us an update. Because our whole industry, I've Zoom meetings on a regular basis with my colleagues around the country. We'd meet every fortnight, just tearing our hair out, going, well, we just don't know. And no organisation can plan its future if it knows no further than 2 weeks ahead.
Yeah.
And you're being asked to weigh up, jobs. You're being asked to weigh up, should you take out loans? You're being asked to decide, should you, mothball your buildings or not? But you have literally no idea. And so my big plea for the government, apart from investment, which I believe we constantly underinvest in culture, but my big plea is as much information as possible so that we can plan, and then we can also help other people. If they're not willing to support the freelance sector, and I think they should, then again, information about when people might be able to return to work and get jobs again is kind of the next best thing, I suppose, in a way. Yeah. And so I think the more that the government can do to help us recover in that kind of sense, in the planning sense, is worth almost as much as money.
That was Roddy Gauld, Chief Executive of the Octagon Theatre in Bolton. Home, in the centre of Manchester, is a relatively new arts organisation, having first opened its doors in 2015, but it was formed from the coming together of two long-standing and much-loved Manchester companies, Library Theatre Company and Corner House Independent Cinema. I spoke to Home's Executive Director and Deputy Chief Executive Jon Gilchrist just after the announcement that theatre performances are to return to Home from October. Home is a bit different to a lot of theatres in that it's more than just a theatre, but obviously the whole building shut down when everything else shut down. So how is reopening affecting Home differently? Are you sort of opening different parts of it gradually?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing to say is we know that not all buildings are the same. We're a modern building, so we're only 5 years old, which means that we have bigger foyers, wider staircases, toilets on every level, baths on every level. So we've sort of got, if there was a venue which was, and also if you think Tony Wilson's place out the front, big sort of private square. So if there was a building which was designed with social distancing in mind, it would be us, and we're very lucky in that respect. I think also, so cinemas had the opportunity to open from the 4th of July, and a lot of our audience does come through cinemas. We've got more cinema seats and more potential for cinema because we can screen each of them 5 times a day.
Yeah.
So what that means is cinema opens and operates in a different way. Firstly, cinema has less risk attached to it. It's all done in terms of, largely, with the exception of some festival stuff, done in terms of splits with distributors. So the outlay in terms of risk is much less. Secondly, your expectation for audience capacity across the course of a year is less. So whereas a lot of venues will need to operate, theatre venues will need to operate on 90% gross occupancy, 70% gross potential in order to break even, cinema works on much, much less. So what that means is we can get cinema open. Our projections are still about, between a quarter and a third of income that we'd expected, because we're only doing 3 screenings a day rather than 4. And the seating capacity is between 20 and 25% in order to ensure social distancing. But what it means is there still is a tipping point at which it's commercially viable to do that. So what that means is a lot of our overhead is already applied. So if we're switching lights on and operating our bars, we've already got that in place. Yeah. And also, a lot of our team, so the finance team will be running finances for the building itself. So actually adding theatre on top of that is less of a risk than it is for buildings that operate exclusively as theatres. I think the second point is that we have 2 theatre spaces at Home. So we've got a around 500-seat Cross Arch Theatre, which is Theatre 1, and about 130-seat Studio Theatre. With social distancing in place, our Theatre 1 space is around the same amount of seated capacity as our Studio Theatre. So what we've been able to do is effectively close T2, and we're giving that over as a talent development space. So that will be able to be used by artists to develop work over this period. And then with Theatre 1, we're effectively able to put some of the artists, companies like Rash Dash, Ship Theatre, Le Gâteau Chocolat, into that space with a programme which might previously have been more scalable to Theatre 2 into Theatre 1, knowing that there is an audience for that work which exists within our database and within the city. So what I would say is that we're quite fortunate in the fact that for all venues, our model makes it A, financially viable, and B, appropriate for us to actually present a full theatre programme.
So you don't have to open up and heat and light a whole building just to put on a play.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also got the benefit of being able to sort of cross market as well.
Yeah.
So we've obviously got multi art forms, which enables us to do that. And also, I guess there's a lot of venues who, when you reopen, you're going to put a lot of safety measures in place. It's a lot of new training programs. You've got to put entirely new ticketing systems in place in order to ensure that you're managing your inventory for the best possible income potential, but also not alienating certain groups. Again, all of that's already in place. We've already run it with Cinema.
Yeah. So what's the atmosphere like in Theatre One with social distancing? Because theatre is a social activity as well as watching entertainment, and particularly comedy. It does depend on people feeling like they're in a group, doesn't it? So is there going to be the same atmosphere, or do we just wait and see?
I think there's an element of wait and see. I think the good thing about the theatre programme is it's a mix. There's some pre-existing work, things like Javad Alipour's I Believe It's Our But Brothers, which, is fantastic. And having seen that, we sort of think that as a piece of work, applying that in a socially distanced way will probably add a little bit of additional atmosphere
yes.
to what is an odd, and really disarming experience anyway. And then Rash Dash's piece of work has been designed specifically over this period. So it's been created with the knowledge that social distancing is going to be in place. But I think what we said from the outset is that it's exactly the same with audience and artists, is that not all artists want to create work with social distancing in place, in the same way that not all audiences will want to attend work with social distancing in place. But our responsibility as a venue that could do it was to be there for the people that did. So when we went out, when Kevin, our amazing head of program, went out and started putting this program together, there were lots of companies who were like, I don't particularly want to do it. I don't think it really suits the type of work that we want to do. And we were really, really eager that we had that conversation with them and didn't just say, we reckon we can just take this play from a studio theatre, plonk it in a 500-seater, and that's going to be a beneficial experience for everyone, because it's not.
Yeah.
But in the same way that not all audiences want to sit in a theatre with social distancing in place.
Well, that was your attitude to the work that you were doing during lockdown as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You weren't just dredging up something that was recorded from the past. You were trying to find things that worked specifically on an online delivery medium, really, weren't you?
And I think the great thing, so this was our Homemakers programme, which our Associate Director, Jude Christian, pioneered, and it's proven to be an absolute massive success. And the idea was that during this period, there's going to be a huge risk that artists, won't get the opportunity to make work for pay and actually generate income from that. So these were commissions, which were paid commissions, where the income generated was split with the artist. But also that they wouldn't have the opportunity to flex their creative muscles, that effectively would lose a generation of artist creativity. So we just set them up and got them running quite quickly. And people have been able to interpret basically theatre makers, generally theatre makers and makers of live performance, creating work specifically for a digital realm and the digital audience. And that's been online games, it's been letters, it's been live performance, it's been durational pieces, it's been whatever people wanted it to be. And the outcome has been as variable, eclectic and wonderful as, and I'm sure you've probably experienced a lot of them and you agree.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that what was important is, again, there were lots of artists who we went to and they went, nah, this isn't for me.
Yeah, yeah.
I do work for a live audience. I don't want this. But I think that in general, people appreciate the endeavour.
Speaking to a few people, particularly people from venues like yourself, they've been very concerned, even though they're struggling as an organisation themselves, they've been very concerned about the people that's come through the doors, particularly freelancers. We've heard about freelancers with this new money from the Arts Council, which our London editor worked out. If all the freelancers got a share of it, they just about get enough for a lunch from Pret a Manger each. But the freelancers are important to home anyway, because for the last few years it's not really been a producing theatre, has it? It's been more encouraging partner organisations and artists to encourage work and helping to fund that, isn't it? So I suppose this sort of feeds into that, doesn't it?
I think so. So one of the other things that we announced is our new Push commissions. So our Push Festival, which takes place in February, we've actually invested more than ever in terms of new commissions for local artists. I think that it's really interesting. We've entered during this most unusual 6-month period. It feels that, without getting too grandiose about it, social justice is at the forefront of everyone's mind. Yeah. And, not just because of the obvious social inequality that's been brought through with COVID, but the Black Lives Matter movement rightly becoming right at the forefront of everyone's mind. Other international continuing events in Belarus, in Hong Kong. I think there is a responsibility for venues to support artists to write work for the now. And by that, I don't mean another COVID play. No. I mean what it is to actually live as a creative person now. And I think what we're finding is there is fewer commissions rather than more commissions over this period because of the lack of actual investment. Yeah. So we're trying, with the limited resources that we've got, in a real financial challenge, to ensure that the way we support freelancers and artists is with work wherever possible. It's with paid opportunities. So that's what the commission was all about. Jenny McCusker, who's our head of talent development, is leading that process, and she's trying to make it as democratic as possible. There's a panel of artists who will help select, and what this will be is part of Home's commitment to work with everyone else, like the GM Artist Hub, which is the citywide talent development initiative, to ensure that when we come out at the end of this, we've actually got artists who can create work for our spaces. Because otherwise we will end up with these massive husks of buildings with absolute zero creativity going on. So when we're supporting the artistic ecology of the region, I can assure you, David, it's not purely an altruistic thing. No. It's significantly important to the financial stability of our building that we've still got people to create work for it. And we've tried our best during a very difficult period to be as communicative and as supportive of the freelance ecology as possible. And if we've fallen short on that at any point, obviously we apologise. It's a very difficult period of time, but we've got to underline how committed we are to support as many people as possible.
And you're doing that with this season by the ticket price is what you would normally expect in a studio theatre, and you're selling everything for £10. Is that a bit of a carrot to try to get people who might be a bit dubious about going out to the theatre to take a chance?
I don't know. I mean, the rationale behind it was that, again, it's back to this point on social justice, is that the theatre and art in general, is probably going to be more important in terms of ensuring that we can make the work as representative of the current needs of the city and the people who live there. And it's important that price doesn't become a barrier to an audience. And I think that there is a version whereby, with a reduced capacity, the way you make up for the loss of income is by just increasing the ticket price. And we were really, really eager. We didn't want to do that. So we wanted to make quite a bold statement. So we're taking a bit of a risk, if I'm honest. Yeah. And we're continuing to £10 tickets. We're continuing to offer £1 Inspire tickets, which continue to be supported through the Oglesby Charitable Foundation, which is just an incredible organisation, which is for communities who don't normally engage with art and culture. And we work to bring people in there. But we're also asking along the way that anyone who is coming who can afford to pay more, that they have a charitable donation on the top of it. And what we're hoping is that people who can will, but people who are unable to pay more than £10, that is the price point. That's what a ticket costs. Yeah. So it's we will continue to fundraise for the additional shortfall that we've got. But at this point, we thought more than ever, it's important that art remains accessible. So that was the reason the decision was made.
Yeah, because the fundraising immediately when you started it after lockdown seemed, well, it was certainly far more successful than getting any money out of the government initially, wasn't it?
And yeah, I think if anyone's listening, thank you, if anyone who donated, because it was incredible, just sort of the outpouring of love and support for the organisation, especially one that's comparatively so young. But I think Home still holds, from the Cornerhouse and the Library Theatre days, from anyone else like that as an institution, it still holds a lot of love from people. And I think over the course of the 5 years that we've been open, people have really understood the value that Home brings to the city and wanted to support it. So we were able to, fundraise a significant amount, and we've been able to continue to do that during the period. I think what we want to be clear with people is that we'll get through this. We will survive, one way or another. We have asked Arts Council for continued support during the cultural relief funds, and we require it. But we also need the opportunity to be able to grow and to be able to continue to support artists, to be able to continue to take risks. And the fundraising is about a program. It's about what we can offer. And by getting open, it will help us underwrite some of that risk that we've got and the losses that we'll make by the reduced capacity in all areas of the business. So yeah, it's a really important thing that we're going to continue to do, and the fundraising campaign into the autumn will be probably bigger than ever.
What's the staffing situation been there? Because we've heard from a lot of theatres that they've had to get rid of staff. I mean, some of theatres have closed completely. It's for you and for all the staff, it's a lot of pressure to be working under, hearing all of that from the theatres. So have you had to reduce the staff in there?
Yeah, we had to make some very difficult decisions, and we initially looked around 10% of the workforce would be reduced, but that has, through voluntary redundancy, through some other changes, that's come down. So the around full-time equivalents will be about 7 people now, which is obviously nowhere near as huge as other organisations across the sector. But to each of those individuals, it is devastating, and these are not decisions that we take lightly. But we knew we needed to reduce cost base due to the scale of the work and the amount of programme that we've got. So it's a very difficult decision. It's something we've been through an incredibly long consultation period with those staff members, and we continue to look for opportunities within the team to redeploy them if we at all can.
And what do you feel about the support that you've had from government and the Arts Council?
I think we're in an incredibly unprecedented period, and I think the Arts Council have been pretty incredible. I think the leadership that they've shown to the sector, and the fact that they've been having to make incredibly quick decisions in order to support people in what is the most ridiculously changing landscape in terms of advice, has meant that every now and then they might have sort of jumped the gun in terms of a decision and something's changed. But I cannot criticise the Arts Council in the slightest in terms of how they've chosen to do things, how they've chosen to respond to government advice. I think in terms of the government's response, I think that the major challenge we've had is in respect of constant changing in guidance and direction. Yeah. I think we were looking for a no sooner than date for a long period of time, and it's just not happened. I think that obviously the bailout is of massive significance. The bailout, the investment package in culture is of massive significance. I think there's obviously a lot of politicking around that because when you break down that money, it is invested in a very different way, but it is incredibly welcome. I think the difference that, I am not a politician for a number of reasons, and, I'm not a political strategist for a number of reasons, but I personally would have liked to see more of the money invested in offsetting risk and enabling work to be created, and less in terms of battening down the hatches. Yeah. I think that if it had been, for instance, if you take every single furloughed member of staff, if you applied that money in order to getting those people to create art during that period, then what could that have been? And I think that there was an opportunity in the way that the Eat Out to Help Out program has basically encouraged restaurants to open and people to go out, that if there could have been some underwriting of lost seats, and in order to actually create new work, especially within theatre, then that would have been cheaper than paying artists to not do anything. It would have provided opportunity. It would have done that thing that I was saying about creating work that speaks to the cultural environment now. And I would have liked to have seen the idea that, for instance, within the building industry, the way that they ensure that the freelance workforce get work. So if you're a scaffolder, they're not saying you need to sit down and don't do scaffolding. You invest in getting the construction industry going again, because then you will employ scaffolders who will then be able to make money, who will then be able to go to restaurants and things like that. I just think that there should have been more investment in that. But again, I'm not over the 100% detail of the reason why these decisions were made in the first place. I would have just liked to have seen more invested in ensuring that work can continue to be made over this period, because I think it's devastating that it hasn't been.
Yeah, that's very diplomatically put, but there was a certain naivety in some of the government announcements. I think they were going for headlines, like when they said, well, theatres can open this Saturday, as though they can open just like a shop. I mean, what did you think when you heard that?
Well, it's funny. We were in the situation whereby we had a timeline laid out in our head. So we released a statement. I wrote a blog, which we were about to, I was just sort of tweaking around the edges. And then the government came out and said, cinemas can reopen on the 4th of July. And at which point we already knew we were planning 3rd of September. Yeah. So at which point, rather than people go, are you going to open? We were like, we're opening on the 3rd of September. Theatre will reopen in the middle of October. Gallery will reopen at a similar sort of time once we've deinstalled the Manchester Open. And we were able to sort of like explain all the rationale behind that. So when they came out and said, theatres can reopen with social distancing by this day, it's like, we already knew it was the middle of October anyway. Yeah. So we were able to just almost like tap on it and just go, that's our date. Yeah. So if people keep asking, we just go, we've already made a decision about our timeline, and explain all the reasons why that decision is. And I think the thing that's sort of the biggest step into the unknown is the future lockdown. It's or a future closure or changes to government guidance, because we've announced this season, and again, there's probably a reason why not many venues have, because it's not the fact that we can do it now. It's just that by the time we open, there's a potential to go live theatre isn't allowed again. Yeah, at which point we have to go. Yeah, which is why the way we sort of see it is that, again, back to my point that not all audiences will want to come back straight away. We sort of imagine the digital and the live theatre elements. It's like having two engines on a boat. It's like, if for any reason, because we've got quite a decent potential in terms of live to digital, the more of these events that we can broadcast online, what we won't do is simply pull them. Right. If we can, we will retain the digital element of it, and that will continue to run. So if in the event that we are forced to close and that live audience can't experience it, we will, refund all the tickets or move them to a different performance, but try, if possible, to still keep that digital date, because there's an element of, I don't know, it's sort of defiance in that, if anything, that we want to create a model that even if the live can't take place, there is an equally weighted.
Still producing something.
But it's not like the digital version of the experience is not been given equal weight. Is I guess what I'm trying to say is that the experience, if you only want to experience online because you're shielding or you're far away or you don't want to take public transport, that we know the experience that we're providing those people at home will be a decent one for the work that it's going to do.
Yeah, because it put out a press release not long ago with a long list of different countries where your work has been seen, which is quite impressive. And you certainly couldn't possibly get to that many people around the world just from working from home, so to speak. So is this like another strand that could be ongoing? Is this your Theatre 3 in effect?
I hope so. I really do. I think that, sometimes in great crisis comes great opportunity.
Yeah,
and I think that we've probably learned a lot more about the digital capabilities of the organisation during this pandemic than we have at any other time. I think sometimes when you create constraints for yourself, then you're able to try out new things. In a way, it's similar to the idea of having loads of these artists that we are being put on our T1 stage. I think frequently there's an opportunity. There's a chance that artists at a particular level get ghettoized at the small space and never get the opportunity to move up. And we believe that it's important that those mid-scale venues don't just become the domain of certain companies. And hopefully, if we can get them up there, see them on a bigger space and just show that it can work. If we can increase the capacities in there, if it gets to the point when it's not 120 seats anymore, we can increase them to 300 seats or whatever, then we will do that. Yeah. And we can start testing some stuff out. So I think we've, throughout this entire period since we decided we were reopening, it's all been about testing. We did a test event this weekend where we invited certain people to come and try out the way we're running bars, catering, the cinema seating, everything else like that. And, we'll change it if it doesn't work. We're not belligerent to that. So, and I think it's exactly the same within the programme. I think we are taking best practice internationally, nationally, anyone else who's doing it. And the moment that any way the landscape shifts, we'll respond to that.
Yeah. Since I've known you, which has been quite a few years now, you worked at quite a few very different types of places. When I first knew you were at the Octagon in Bolton, which is a regional funded theatre. Then you were at the Lowry, which is a big receiving house that does a wide range of different scales of work. And then you're at the Bush, which is a new writing theatre down in London. And now Home, again, is a very different type of venue. So you must have quite a decent overview of the theatre industry and the different types of problems that they're encountering at the moment. Are there different challenges that all those different types of theatres have got at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing to say is that I think that it's very, very difficult to overlay one organisation's experience with another, as they're all sitting on very, very different problems. I think that's probably one of the major challenges within the Arts Council funding, the way it's laid out, is that the first round was around challenges up to September. This next round is about everything up to March. But there are organisations who won't hit their financial problems until September 2021. Yeah. And I think every organisation needs to adapt its business plan accordingly. I think the major risks to me, as I see it speaking to colleagues across the country, are within large-scale non-funded touring venues, just because they're heavily reliant on programme, and that programme won't be up and running anytime soon because there's no way of capitalising it without avoiding the risk. So if you are sitting in one of those independent large-scale venues without any of the programme coming through or any huge corporations to buttress you over this period, it's what do you do? Yeah. And I think when you look at those sort of 2,000 seat spaces that don't have any other the levers to pull on, that is a worry. I think producing houses, especially those that are overly reliant on Christmas income, I think, especially if you're sitting on big teams who focus on making over that period, and you're generating a third of your income across the period of a month and a half, 2 months, it's like, what do you do? Where do you go from there? Do you feel confident enough to put 21 on sale? Will people buy it? Will you be able to cash flow the organisation if you're not sitting on the income from those tickets. And there's lots of questions that you'd have. So I think that the good thing about visual arts venues or attractions is that, yes, they might rely on, especially not non-ticket income costing ones, is that you can usually survive just by reducing expenditure in certain areas to make up the losses in ancillary trading, especially if any funding you're getting is maintained. And independent cinemas, obviously, the economic model is slightly different. Yeah. So it does feel that the risk is in theatre, either due to a scarcity of available programme or through the lack of ability to produce work that you'd expect to generate income. And fortunately, due to the nature of our model, we're able to pull on more levers in other art forms to make up those losses around toured theatre income elsewhere. But I think that's where I would say the biggest concerns lie.
But the last few months, there must have been a lot of juggling of figures and changing of plans that are really detailed that you made a week before or something.
I did at one point say jokingly that if I'd hibernated from the middle of March through to the middle of June, based on a lot of the financial modelling that we've done, I'd be in exactly the same place. Because it feels like it's such a changing landscape, and you're building things on shifting sands. And I'm incredibly fortunate to work with some just amazing people who have helped out, help remodel things and re-envisage things in different ways. But it's been probably the most responsive period in terms of planning. So it's been very, very difficult to think too long term. You've just got to focus on the next target. Want to get this announced, want to get this open, want to get this done. And then usually you're thinking in 3-4 year cycles. It's very difficult to do that right now. But yeah, it's been an odd time planning financially.
I bet you weren't very popular with the press department.
Oh gosh, yes. It's basically Kat Harrison-Dibbets just rolling her eyes over WhatsApp message. I can tell what she's doing.
All right, to finish with then, if what ideally, other than money, would you ask for now from the government? What's the best thing that they could give to theatres now?
Just clarity. I think just clarity. I think it's clarity in terms of what we can do and what we're allowed to do. And if we talked about, it's almost like you need a red amber green situation where it's just like, if something's coming down the line, it gives a little bit of warning that that's coming down the line, and then we can start preparing for it, planning for it. I think there's this dropping things, on Twitter, I think is, it's unhelpful because it makes everyone feel that they're out of the loop. So I think a little bit more clarity would be good. I think on a broader version, it would be good to know what they perceive the purpose of theatre to be in the recovery. Because I think that there's been a lot of focus on, how hospitality or how construction or how aviation has been a critical part of what the recovery for the economy is going to be. But sometimes it feels that the messaging runs in counter to that. Is that it's more, we want you to batten down the hatches and then reopen again when everything's safe. And, if that is the case, and there is an anticipation that there will be a state of hiatus for theatre, it should be good that there's absolute clarity of that's what they want. And then we'd be able to fight back. We'd be able to sort of explain all the reasons why theatre is so economically beneficial in whatever form it is. If you can give us a little bit of a chance to get it. And I think that it's funny, if you look at Educating Rita at the Minac, or you look at what the guys at Troubadour are doing in Wembley Park with the Sleepless musical, whether they work or not, there's a sense of defiance in there that, or the Bridge Theatre season, it's just that you just got to admire, is the fact that, if we can prove it can be done and people will come, and that stimulates the economy around it in whatever way they want, I think slowly and performatively we'll be making a message to government that this can be done and it's worth it. but also not that everyone can do it. I need to underline that, is that, you know, for who it's possible for, I think theatre can and should be a critical element of what it is to revive the economy of this country.
That was Jon Gilchrist, Executive Director and Deputy Chief Executive of Home in Manchester. For more information about the Octagon in Bolton, see www.octagonbolton.co.uk, and for information about Home, see homemcr.org. And of course, keep looking at britishtheatreguide.info for the latest information about what is happening in theatres across the UK. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.